You're listening to a 3CR podcast recorded in the 3CR Community Radio studio in Melbourne, Australia. If you like what you hear, please consider donating or subscribing so we can keep bringing you more independent community content. For more information, go to 3cr.org.au.
Slavery is back.
Welcome to a place where private business profit from a captive labour force, yet pennies are spent on medical services to a population in which the Indigenous, the poor and the mentally ill are overrepresented. Where isolation, humiliation and degradation are facts of life. Welcome to prison.
It depends who's telling the story, I suppose. The prisoners would have one view, the people who work in the prison system would have another, and I think it's up to people to decide where the truth is.
Give government propaganda and the media spin doctors the flick. And check out Doin Time for news, views and tunes on prison issues from Guantanamo Bay to Christmas Island to prisons and detention centres everywhere. Every Monday at 4 p.m. on your community radio 3CR.
We are still fired up and we're still talking about revolution.
Hello and welcome to the Doin Time show. This is 3CR Community Radio, 855 AM on the dial, streaming live on www.3cr.org.au. This is Marisa and I'll be with you for the next hour. And a warning that this episode of Doin Time contains audio images of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who have died and discussion of deaths in custody. This episode discusses incidents of self-harm. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander listeners are advised that this show contains the name of a person who has died. First up, we'll be joined by Karen, who is president of the Black People's Union, and he will speak to us in more detail about what land he's from. But essentially, he's a Wani Andean man and long-time activist, and he is going to be speaking with us about some issues in regards to violations of human rights in regards to Aboriginal youth and looking at youth incarceration and other things. And then after that, we will speak with Megan Cracker and Jerry Georges from National Suicide Prevention Trauma Recovery, and they will speak to us about the 2 deaths in custody that happened in juvenile detention. It really is atrocious what has happened to these young men that have died in prison. And then after that, we will be speaking with Ranuga, who is the spokesperson of the Tamil Refugee Council, and Ranuga will speak to us about the dreadful consequences of the fast-track system, and will speak to us about live protests that are taking place about the permanent visa, sending a strong message to Tony Burke that there needs to be permanent visas. There is also warning content in that interview, as an asylum seeker has killed himself in Dandenong in Melbourne, and we will talk about that as well. But first up, we will cross over to Karen.
So it's up to us, the people. We need a treaty in this country. We need the end to the war in this country. And the only way we can do that is through a peace treaty. Not the one you see in Victoria, not the one you see in Queensland, not the one you see in the Northern Territory, because they talk treaty and still lock our people up. They still kill our people. They still desecrate our land and our water. A treaty means peace. A treaty means equality. And a treaty means justice. Thank you.
You're listening to Radical Radio on 3CR, 855 on your AM dial, 3CR digital, and podcasting and streaming on 3cr.org.au.
longer in denouncing what imperialism is doing to us and around the world.
Because the future belongs to all of us.
No social improvement, no victory is achieved without struggle.
And together, we will hold these fuckers accountable.
Disrupt land forces. 3CR continues to amplify frontline voices in a powerful stand against the global arms trade with a united call for peace. Tune in from the 8th to the 14th of September for our special coverage on the events with 8 a.m. updates and interviews on 3CR Breakfast, live from the front lines of resistance. You can listen back to our full coverage by visiting 3cr.org.au/DLF 2024. Disrupt Land Forces special coverage, 8th to the 14th of September on your radical community radio 3CR.
And in case people have just tuned in, this is the Doin Time show. And our first interview is with Kieran, who is, as I said in my introduction, he is president of the Black People's Union. And hello, Kieran. Welcome to the program.
Hey, Marisa. How you going? Thanks for having me on.
Oh, good. Thanks a lot for coming. It's fantastic to have you. Now, Kieran, let's start off, in case new listeners have tuned in, just to tell us what land you're from.
Yep, so I'm from Waniwandian country, which is up in the Yuin Nation, which is now on the south coast of what's known as New South Wales. If people know where Nowra is on the south coast, it's pretty much from Nowra down to the Vic border.
Beautiful. So we've got a really packed show today, Kieran. I want to start off talking to you about just what's happening in Alice Springs and also incarcerated youth in general. And then after you, we're going to be speaking with Megan from WA, from the Suicide Prevention and Trauma and Recovery, about the two youths that died in custody there. So let's start off with you. What's your take on all this, Kieran?
Yeah, well, look, I've been, looking a bit into, I suppose, just youth incarceration in general over the last week or so. Ever since the Northern Territory Country Liberal Party leader, Fino Kiero, I might be pronouncing that wrong, but, she said that as part of her election promises that she would reintroduce spit hoods and lower the age of criminal responsibility in the Northern Territory from 12, which in itself is already too low, but they want to lower it from 12 down to 10 years old. Just for perspective here, 10 years old, these little kids are in, grade 3 or 4 at primary school. They're tiny little kids. And it took years and years of advocating, of lobbying, of petitions and commissions and reports, etc., to try and raise that age in Northern Territory in the first place, and also to bring in policies that ban the use of spit hoods on youth. But, that's all gone right out the window now, and it's absolutely atrocious. On top of this as well, they want to introduce laws that will make bail conditions and punishment for bail breaches a lot harsher and a lot stricter. And they also want to bring in boot camps for our youth. So, they'll be sending our youth off to boot camps and stuff as well. It's absolutely despicable what's happening up there at the moment. And the way that their archaic and draconian laws work, even a lot of these children and a lot of the, young adults that have been through this system up here, they're not only priced out of consultation completely around this stuff, but they can't even speak out about it publicly. They've got all sorts of laws in place up there and all sorts of suppression orders and whatever else that actually prevent children and ex-detainees being able to properly speak out publicly about their experience and about what they've gone through in these correctional centres up there. And, at best, their experiences and everything they've gone through gets condensed down into some report that sits on a government desk for however many months before it just gets discarded and ignored, like every other report over the last however many decades.
I was really not surprised when I heard that, and I just can't believe it. It can't get any worse, Kieran.
It's absolutely disgusting. And, it's not just Northern Territory as well. This is a very systemic and societal problem right across Australia. Australia is a racist nation, and, the Northern Territory, don't get me wrong, is a very racist state in itself within this racist nation. So it's to be expected, I suppose, at the end of the day. But it's disgusting. And they've got all these other apartheid-style laws in place that have been active at different points over the last, 20-odd years. Stuff like the Northern Territory intervention going back to 2007. For listeners who are a bit unaware of all that, back in 2007, the federal government suspended the Racial Discrimination Act so that they could enact the Northern Territory Emergency Response, which was essentially just the cover for the federal government to roll the military into Aboriginal communities in the Northern Territory to extinguish stuff like native title and other land grants up there, and to forcibly acquire natural resources like minerals and like timbers for billion-dollar companies to pocket billions of dollars more profits off of. On top of this, you've got stuff like laws in place around the consumption of alcohol up there. Laws that essentially prevent mobs from being able to purchase or consume alcohol, and laws that carry jailable punishments for this sort of stuff as well. You can literally get locked up in the Northern Territory for being a black fella and having a beer with your mate. And I'm not talking about public intoxication. I'm not talking about public recklessness or, DUIs or anything like that. I'm just talking about the actual consumption of alcohol itself. That's how backwards and how restrictive and regressive this state is up there.
It really is terrible and disgusting the way all these curfews have been put in place. And it's not not even solving the problem. There needs to be abolition, and there needs to be funding put into other good programs for young people to remain on country.
Yeah, definitely. And, that's the thing as well. When we look at funding, they spend hundreds of millions, maybe even billions of dollars on so-called First Nations programs, right, in the Northern Territory and across Australia. Now, most of this money, though, never actually makes it to First Nations' hand. Instead, it gets allocated to dodgy service providers who burn through all the funding before it even hits the ground. It all gets eaten up in admin costs so that, a few dozen entrepreneurs who are mates with ministers and politicians up in the Northern Territory can score a cushy job where they'll get, 6 or 7 figures a year, pocket millions of dollars, and at the end of the day, by the time the funding actually gets to the ground, actually gets to where it's needed, it's all dried up. And the little bit of funding that does make it through, and there's been lots of actual investigations into this, right? But the funding that does actually make it to the ground, more often than not, it doesn't actually make it to the ground for First Nations specific programs. It gets used in mainstream programs. So, that means programs for anyone, whether they're First Nations or not. But this is coming out of, First Nations earmarked funding. And on top of that too, the amount of funding that we put into incarcerating people it's insane. It's crazy. I think nationally it's something like $147,000 per year to keep an adult in prison. Down here in Victoria, it's like $154,000 per year per adult. Now, when we look at kids, it's even more. It's something like $6,000 per day. We're talking $250,000 a year per child locked up in the cells here. That's so much money. And when we look at, all these programs as well that have proven success, you got to question, why aren't they putting any funding into these programs? There's places here on this continent, as well as New Zealand, as well as the United States and Canada, where there's so much evidence that shows that cultural programs and language revival programs and, other similar programs, they don't just reduce incarceration, they pretty much make the crime rate zero and the drug use rate zero in those communities. Because, once people are actually engaged in culture and practicing culture and they've got their respect for culture, they're not going to go out and abuse drugs and do crime. But, for some reason, we throw $1 million a year into locking up 4 kids when instead we could be putting $1 million a year into diversionary programs that would save 1,000 or more kids.
Absolutely. And in fact, I'd really like to get you back on the show quite soon to talk about this a little bit more, because after I organised your interview, I actually had a look at some of these young people that have died in detention in WA, and you know Megan Cracker, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, and she's going to be joining us pretty soon to talk about that. So we'll have to end it really soon. But can you come back next Monday?
Yeah, definitely.
Because I'd really like to continue this discussion and have a follow-up discussion about all this after I speak to Megan, and maybe you can come in. That would be awesome.
Yeah, no worries. Sounds good. That'll be really good too, because I'd like to talk about stuff like recidivism as well.
About what, sorry?
Recidivism. So, people being incarcerated and then as a result being more prone to be reincarcerated again and again.
Lock it in your calendar, and we'll make a time. We'll do it next Monday at 4. If you could come in, that would be lovely.
Yeah, no worries. Sounds great.
And I'll see if we can get a couple of other people to join us as well, and we'll have a really big discussion about it. It's just dreadful with all these suicides and self-harm that are happening.
Yeah, and, we've got such a problem with that, Like, Aboriginals, especially Aboriginal youth, we've got the highest suicide rate in the entire world. The highest
Indeed. And I think it's just so important that we speak to First Nations activists such as yourself, and also Megan, who are on the ground, having a look at all this. All right, well, look, I better cross over to Megan now and Jerry, and we'll have a chat. Can you come in next Monday?
Yeah, sounds good. I'll come in.
Lock it in. Okay.
All right, no worries. Thanks,
Marisa. Talk to you next week. Thanks.
Bye.
The biggest weapons fair in the Southern Hemisphere is coming to Naarm. Land forces will run at the Melbourne Convention Centre. All arms dealers will be there. So will we. From the 8th to the 14th of September, we are mobilising to disrupt land forces. This is where the generals, weapons CEOs, diplomats and defence ministers come together to do the deals that end in genocide. We plan to shut that shit down. Albert, Lockheed, Hanwha, Boeing, Thales, Naya, the biggest weapon makers in the world, will be there to grab their piece of the genocide pie. Join the collaboration to disrupt land forces. We support all cultures, genders, ages, ability and protest styles. Connect with us. disruptlandforces.org. Join the mobilisation from the 8th to the 14th of September to stop arming Israel and put a stop to this genocide shop. Disrupt Land Forces is a 3CR supporter.
And you're back with the Doin Time show, and it's approximately 4:17, and we're going to be speaking now with Megan Cracker and also Jerry Georges from the National Suicide Prevention Trauma Recovery. And, a lot of really bad things have happened in WA with teenagers. Hello, Megan and Jerry. Welcome to the program.
Hey, hello. How are you?
Hello. Lovely to have you.
Always a pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you get just a little bit closer to the phone, Megan?
There, is that a little bit better?
That's better, yeah. Hi, Jerry.
How are you?
Good. Well, passable. So, the Banksia Hill Detention Centre, where a 17-year-old Indigenous boy has become WA's second death in juvenile detention in 10 months. Can you two talk about this? Because I'm sure the mainstream media hasn't discussed this properly.
No worries, I'll preface. So Banksia Hill, that opened up in 1997, there's been about 20,000 children that have gone through Banksia Hill since that period. As a rule, 70% go on into adult carceral estates. Several years ago, the Department of Corrective Services, Department of Justice, and in fact the West Australian Government, they opened up Unit 18. Unit 18 is in Casuarina Prison, which is an adult maximum security prison over here in Western Australia. So you've got Banksia Hill with an extension of Unit 18 in Casuarina Prison. And that is where Cleveland Dodd passed away in October last year. We've now got another young person who has lost his life. So we've had 2 young people in a period of 12 months that have taken their lives in Banksia Hill, and it's absolutely atrocious. And this government chooses not to fix it. They choose not to close down Unit 18, even though they've got 4 children, and for each child that's in Unit 18, $1.1 million per year. It's absolutely ludicrous. The state government have said that they're not going to close down Unit 18 until such time that there's a new facility where, in terms of Cleveland Dodd, rest in peace, it's the biggest coronial inquest. We've had the first tranche, now the second tranche, with a third tranche happening between the 7th and the 9th of October. So in spite of all the warnings and in spite of all the advocacy, the harm, the treatment, the inhumane conditions, the Department of Corrective Services, the Department of Justice, and in fact the government have been very mediocre in terms of their performance, in terms of managing children, and they are absolutely woeful, and they have blood on their hands today.
It's really disgusting. So Cleveland Dodd was just 16 years old, wasn't he, when he took his own life inside Unit 18?
He was only 16 years old. He had turned 16 in 6 weeks prior, and the last 10 months of his life was spent in Unit 18, with the last 86 days of his life, of those 86 days of his life, the last 86 days of his life, 75 of those days were spent in solitary confinement, 23 hours at the very least, sometimes 24 hours a day. So for 75 out of the 86 days, it was 24 hours in effect locked up in a stir-crazy cell. That's what they try and tell us is suicide-proof. They don't understand suicidality. They've got no humaneness. It's compassionless, but it's also not just draconian. It's an abomination. It's reprehensible. It's inconceivable that these people would actually think that someone is suicide-proof in a place such as that.
So the Royal Commission into Aboriginal Deaths in Custody, one of the recommendations is that there needs to be hanging points taken out of cells. I don't think that's happened.
No, it definitely hasn't happened. The ligature points haven't been removed, and that was a recommendation from the Royal Commission. Right now, the Royal Commission into Aboriginal Deaths in Custody, they might as well just throw that in the bin because they're certainly not taking into account the seriousness of the recommendations. With that, there's the onus is also with the Commonwealth, as it is with the states and territory in terms of those recommendations, but we'll see that many of those recommendations haven't been carried forward. In terms of Cleveland, rest in peace, prior to him passing the ill soul, it was said in the coronial inquest, 1 hour, 53 minutes over a 7-day period is what he spent out of his cell. We need to remember that in terms of the unlawfulness that the state government was operating Banksia Hill was certainly there. There was a total case in Western Australia where the state government was challenged, and what it found is that they have things called confinement orders. Children were being locked down 23, 24 hours a day. As a result of the toll decision, it said that children have to have at least 1 hour out of cell time per day. That didn't happen in many situations, and that was uncovered during the coronial inquest. The other thing too, they have detention management reports. Those detention management reports that outlines a number of things. With that also, there found to be a number of breaches. So the department, they've acted rogue, but not only acting rogue, they've acted unlawfully. And that is absolutely serious. They're basically in contempt of court through not listening to the laws of this country. And the laws in Western Australia, as per the toll decision, talk specifically about the confinement orders which the department's actually breached. Now, the other thing too, there was a man who was the he was the superintendent at Banksia Hill, and it was found that he actually lied on the stand. And what I mean by that, there was a coronial inquest, which were in the third tranche coming the 7th to the 9th of October, but they also had the Triple C, and the Triple C with this person, they gave him an interview. They interviewed him, and when they interviewed him, there was one issue of contention, and that was, were you aware that the cameras were being covered up? And he said no. Then he went to the first tranche of the coronial inquest and he heard the evidence that was given by the juvenile custodial officers. Every single one of those juvenile custodial officers said they raised it. Then he, at the coronial inquest, and I was there in the room, he had to retract his statement and he had to say, yes, I am aware. But he, in fact, lied. So basically, he committed perjury, and the Department of Justice and, in fact, the government need to hold him to account for lying.
Yes. It's lying, and it's a violation of human rights.
Well, that's exactly right. The kids have been suffering from for a very long time. We've heard the stories. Sarah and I, we've actually gone through the state of Western Australia, and we've taken testimonies from thousands of young people. And the young people have all said the same thing about the inhumane conditions, the way that they were treating, the taunts, the maggots in foods, the constant lockdown, the rolling lockdowns, the searches that were inappropriate. It was just absolutely atrocious. And we know that many of the children, after they leave from Banksia Hill, they go on and take their lives, or they're no longer here. Dear souls, rest in peace. But what's happening in Western Australia, it's absolutely indictment, not only the Western Australian government, but also the Commonwealth.
And actually, just for a fact, to understand the context of deaths after custody, there have been 2 deaths in custody at Banksia Hill in the last 10 months, but after custody, since the inception establishment of Banksia Hill in 1997, with 20,000 people going through, more than 100 children have taken their lives in the first year post-release after Banksia Hill, 14, 15, 16, 17 years of age, let alone all those that took their lives at 18 and 19. So deaths after custody needs to be understood. You go in, you come out worse for wear rather than better. So people are leaving the children's prison in a worse condition than what they went in.
So, Marisa, the reality is this, my dear, is that this department was warned, the government was warned, and we've advocated on the ground with children, with families, hence the relentless media, to say these changes need to occur. If they don't occur, you're going to have your first death. And then we're expecting a second. And touch wood, and I hope that this doesn't happen, but under the current conditions that the children are living in,
it will happen.
It will happen again. And that's the truth of it. And who has the blame for this is the Cook government of Western Australia. Mark McGowan, who was a former Premier. Bill Johnson, who was a former Minister for Corrective Services. And he is very disrespectful because at the time of the second transfer to the coronial inquest, if he wanted to speak about Unit 18 and why he supported the decision for the children to be moved to Unit 18, he should have gave evidence in the coronial inquest. And for him to not do that, it shows that the government, they certainly think they are above the law, and that is wrong in any sense.
There are 115 adult prisons in this country, so it's a large carceral state, and there are 17 juvenile detention facilities or children's prison, is the appropriate language that we should be using, and not dumbing it down to detention facility. It's actually a child prison. It's a hovel. It's a gulag. It's a corral of human misery. But they're punitive and they're barbarous, and the only people that can define or make up what these prisons should look like as places of well-being and bastions of positive identity-forming education and life's transformative stuff are governments. It's our governments that have the context by being at the helm, not anyone else. Governments decide where money goes, what's funded, and what prisons should look like. And they're actually making them the worst possible experience imaginable. And deterrence isn't working, and deterrence is actually compounding trauma and diminishing these people to broken. Some people ask, are we breaking these children? I actually say that we have actually broken them. We have broken lives and broken minds.
Absolutely. Because, look, week in, week out, I look at deaths in custody, children, adults, of all ages, and suicide. It has to stop.
Yes.
Well, absolutely. We've got Malandaria McCarthy over here in the West Australians. She's said that she's going into Banksia Hill. But we've had many politicians that have gone into Banksia Hill, yet the crisis continues. So I'm hoping, and Malandaria is a good person, I'm hoping that there can be some difference made as a result. But the reality is, unless she's immersing in the grim reality, understanding the families, know the carers and so forth, the advice that she gets is not going to make any difference whatsoever. At the moment, there's a lack of political will in Western Australia, but also across the country in terms of the government. They don't want to fix the problem because, as far as I see, they just want to make us a business. Well, we have to stand up, fight back, and very much correct the narrative.
And we have to understand what prisons actually are. They're not places of well-being. They're not places of the restorative, of the life transformative, of redemption, salvation, of rehabilitation. These are all buzzwords that they're claiming. The recent deaths in custody of the 17-year-old and the 16-year-old go to the heart and soul that this is a systemic issue. These prisons are rotten to the core, adult and child prisons. They're rotten to the core. They're dungeons, they're barbarous, and they're inhumane. All these people are in holding pens, going stir crazy and diminishing, invalidating them and coming out worse for wear. Cleveland was a First Nations boy. He was a descendant of the First Peoples. And this young boy who has died now is non-First Nations. He's a child of this continent. But that goes to the heart and soul that prisons are barbarous for everybody. And we've got to actually see it for what they are. The problem is that prisons aren't a black problem, a brown problem, a white problem. They're a systemic problem. They're rotten to the core, and that needs to be addressed. And I'll just give you one statistic that actually defines how diabolical these prisons actually are. When we talk about deaths in custody, there have been nearly 600 deaths in custody of First Nations people since 1991, since the Royal Commission ended. But there's also been more than 2,000 deaths in custody, and a significant proportion like deaths in custody of First Nations people, of a non-First Nations people, that actually are at a higher rate than First Nations. So it's actually a diabolical place for any human being. And the over-representation of First Nations people in our prisons is a problem made not by themselves, but a problem made by the sense of the nation.
And it's absolutely atrocious in terms of the Aboriginal Visitor Scheme. The Aboriginal Visitor Scheme, they're operating over here in Western Australia, and that's a recommendation from the Royal Commission into Aboriginal Deaths in Custody. But what they do in the prison system is that they have people working, from the 8 to the 5 o'clock. But both of these deaths, they happen after hours, late, one night, early hours the next morning. But there is no presence of the Aboriginal Visitor Scheme. And I have said to those that are working in Banksia, or I've said to the government, I've said to this person, that person, you need to ensure that there are people there all hours of the night, and not just people. They need to be people with connectedness from the community, because our people know these children and they can actually de-escalate situations. And that's exactly what Jerry and I did when we went into Banksia Hill Detention Centre. So while the government and all others say it's too complex, well, I say that they don't know what they're talking about and they're speaking very inexpert. They are just children, and these other people are the adults. And the adults, they really need to have a good check at themselves, good look at themselves, because at the moment they're killing children.
When we were in Banksia Hill, and I'll be quick, we actually saw it with our own eyes, the way they rough-treated, rough-handled, and diminished these kids in ways that other people would be held to account for, and criminally so. But we saw it with our own eyes, so we talked with a first-hand experience.
I think what really made my blood run cold, to be quite honest with you, was when I had a look at some of the media coverage, and the commissioner, I believe it's Commissioner Royd, was saying that the boy who died in custody recently was intoxicated and had to put him in Unit 18.
Yes.
How is that relevant to that justification? And then there was a suicide.
Well, it was unheralded what actually happened. They were talking about the circumstance or the alleged circumstance of what led to this boy being incarcerated. The fact is, when they put out a media release, they don't actually refer to any of this stuff. They don't refer to the modality. They don't refer to allegations. They don't do that. This was actually, in our view, a chain reaction, an implosion on the part of government and the Department of Corrective Services to try and actually cover their backs as to why this child was lost. Because they've been making out that they've got all sorts of programs in Banksia Hill now, 32 programs to keep kids busy, which I actually call BS on, and 13 in Unit 18, which I actually will call BS on, because I know that's not the case. These are notorious facilities. They actually imputed that the facility at Banksia Hill, the main facility, was actually suicide-proof. That's what they were actually imputing, without any clinicians, without any specialist support, without mentors, nurturers and the like, or whatever, that would actually support them through their low moments. If this child was actually inebriated, as they said, he should have gone to a sobering up short stay, or to a clinical facility where he could have been supported, or to a hospital. To actually make those comments was insensitive to the biological family, was insensitive to his carers, was insensitive to everybody who remembers him. It was insensitive. It was intended to demonise so it could diminish him in our eyes and say that this was somehow his fault.
And, Marisa, I'll just say this quickly. Mm-hmm. In terms of this young person, dear soul, he was in the state care of the Department of Child Protection. So the Department of Child Protection, they had a guardianship order over this young child.
So he died in the care of the state. He died in the care of child protection and in the care of corrective services. He was in the care of the state since the age of 9 months of age till 18. So they were the ones responsible for his care.
And to say otherwise in terms of family, shame on them, because they had the overarching responsibility to ensure that he was kept safe. And that is having a really sad draconian impact on our young people in Noongar country and all those that knew him. So, you know, in terms of the state government, shame on them, and shame on Brad Royce, the Commissioner for the Department of Corrective Services, trying to demonise a young person once again. Who is the adult here? Who is the child? This young boy, as Jerry just mentioned, he was in state care. So it's a double whammy, and two departments have failed the child and left the community in grief.
Megan and Jerry, thank you so much for coming onto the program, and I'm hoping that we can stay in touch and really have a look at the ongoing atrocities that are happening as a result of colonisation and systemic atrocities.
Well, and absolutely. And the Prime Minister, he basically made comment that they're not going to get involved. Well, don't come looking over in Western Australia for your votes at the next federal election when you're failing our kids and leaving kids to try and be alive or be held.
They said in the last, when they were elected, after being out of government for 9 years, they said, we will leave no one behind and hold no one back. Well, they're not just leaving these kids behind, they're holding them back themselves. On that note, I'll finish, and thank you for having us on.
Let's watch this space, and you know, we'll see. Hopefully, if, you know, it can be accountable here, but I don't think so at the moment. We've got a long way to go. Megan, before you go, can you just tell listeners what land you're on? It's always good to put that in context.
Over here in Noongar country, beautiful weather today. I'm from Menang country, which is down in Mount Barker. Mount Barker is about 3.5 hours away from Perth. A couple of the brothers some time ago, back in 82, they went over and played for the Great North Melbourne Footy Club. So that's the relationship with the Crackers.
And Jerry, you've also done some beautiful work, and thank you so much for doing the interview with Megan.
It's just sad what brings us, intersects us sometimes. I hope that someday we can get on and talk solutions and see them actuated and see lives transformed rather than this grim reality persisted with. But I hold the government to account. They're the ones who, with the context and the ones with their hands on the helm. But thank you.
Let's keep up the fight.
Will do. Love.
Thanks a lot, Megan and Jerry. Talk to you soon.
Appreciate it. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.
Listen back to Beyond the Bars 2024 prison broadcasts on the 3CR website, 3cr.org.au/Beyond the Bars 2024. Our all-black presenter team take you inside 6 Victorian prisons: Dame Phyllis Frost, Barwon, Fulham, Loddon, Margate and Port Phillip, to hear stories, songs, opinions and poems from Aboriginal inmates on NAIDOC Week 2024. Connecting the participants with culture and community, and to keep the fire burning, black, loud and proud. Go to 3cr.org.au/Beyond the Bars for all the details.
If you're a friend of me, I'll call you my brother. This country's black future is a fire.
And you're back with the Doin Time show, and you just heard an interview with National Suicide Prevention Trauma Recovery, Megan and Jerry. And we're now going to be speaking with Ranuga, who's been patiently waiting. Ranuga is a spokesperson from the Tamil Council, from the Refugee Tamil Council, and she spoke to us a couple of weeks ago about a live protest that has been happening outside Tony Burke's office in Sydney. And we're going to be speaking with her right now, and we'll also talk to her about a refugee man who committed suicide in Melbourne. Hello, Ranuga. Welcome to the program.
Hi, how are you?
Not good, thank you. Look, I wanted to apologise for the lateness of the interview. We've just had a lot of really sad deaths in custody today on the show.
Yes, I heard about that as well, the Western Australia, the teenager that died.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you for your patience. So, Ranuga, can you tell us what's happening?
So for Melbourne, the action today is 48 days. And for Sydney, it's day 28. For Brisbane, I believe it's day 8. And for Adelaide, it's day 1. And there's a continuous protest, 24/7 action on the call for the Australian government to provide permanent protection for all refugees. While saying that, many believe that the migration laws are fair and just. However, I would like to say that on the 28th of August, the Tamil community lost a 23-year-old man who self-immolated due to the harsh migration laws. And he was an individual who kept coming to 24/7 action, and he kept providing help. And he was actually one of the strongest pillars in Melbourne. So the Melbourne team has lost a very strong support. And also we had lost another individual on Thursday from natural causes. He was also a refugee. He was also from the Tamil community. And they were both fathers. So Mano, a 23-year-old, has a 16-month-old kid in Australia. And Sasiharan, who died on Thursday, has 3 kids in Sri Lanka who he's unable to see. Yeah.
Oh, that is just... words can't even describe it.
Mm.
And this really is as a consequence of what's happening.
Yes, definitely. Like, Mano felt, he just felt he was worthless because of the migration laws. You know, he came here at the age of 11 after facing genocide, came with his siblings and his parents, and he felt worthless because, you know, from 11 to 23, his life has been uncertain. So from a child to a young adult, he was forced to pay tax despite not having permanent protection. He was forced to face his friends being deported back to danger. He was forced to witness the younger generation unable to go to uni. And he felt, like many other refugees in Australia, hopeless and unsure where the future is. And this is the action of the Australian government. This is the action of people as well who are supporting the Australian government's actions now. This is what's happening in the communities. The refugee communities are struggling. And I would like to say, how many more deaths does the Australian government have to see for them to realise? You know, after Mano's death, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese states, you know, he, supports, feels sad for the family. That's not good enough. This family is now going to remember that Mano died because of the harsh migration laws. Our Tamil community is going to remember this is another death. And for the Tamil community, this is 3 deaths in 1 month, Marisa. 3 deaths.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
That's terrible.
Exactly. And for on behalf of the Tamil community, we faced a genocide. We had to count deaths there. And now the Tamil community are telling me we have to count deaths here because of laws. So the trauma that is being carried within our community is horrible, Marisa, because of these migration laws.
It is horrible that this trauma has happened and that people are dying from their own hand.
Exactly. And what is so disgusting is the Labor government has stated that the fast-track system is flawed. Yet, these are the victims of the fast-track. Mano was a victim of the fast-track, and now he's a victim of the Labor government's actions. And me being the spokesperson of Tamil Refugee Council, the Labor government and the Liberal government have blood on their hands, because for both governments, refugees have died due to suicide, natural causes. Refugees have been sent back to danger, possibly killed in various nations. And this is the actions of the government. And even now, after the death of Mano, there has been no proper just action. And this is another statistic that will be put on the document that we, the allies of the refugees, the refugee communities, have to read out day in and day out, that this is the repercussions of the migration laws. This is what has caused to happen in our own country, Australia. The citizens have to realise that Australia is not just some beautiful place. This country is built on genocide. The system of the migration laws is built on racism. It is up to us, the citizens, to actually speak up and to stand with the refugees and to amplify their voices.
Indeed, and the Doin Time show has been doing a lot of extensive coverage and interviewing refugees from 12,000 captive souls as well in Melbourne, the encampment there in Docklands. And I believe that you and I did an interview a couple of weeks ago for Sydney. You know, these refugees are actually in freezing cold conditions, cold temperature, high temperatures, and nothing is happening.
No, and even, Marisa, yesterday, it was hot in Sydney and it was hot in Brisbane, and we actually held a Father's Day event, remembering Mano, who was a father, remembering Sasiharan, who was a father, remembering the fathers who have died here in Australia, and remembering the fathers who have died in various homelands, and the children who have come here when they were young, who were unable to see their fathers. We remembered them. And in Brisbane, 2 individuals fainted because of the heat.
When was it hot? Yes, in Sydney, hot?
It was hot in Sydney yesterday.
Really?
And it was very hot, about 30 degrees. It's incredibly hot here. And in Brisbane, it was extremely hot. The 2 people had fainted and the ambulance had to be called.
Oh, my God.
So this is the extent that refugees are going, right? And people can say, they're just sitting out. What are they going to achieve? I must say, Marisa, from the refugees sitting outside doing this 24/7 action, being determined, it is only now that the immigration minister, the individuals involved in the migration system are realizing that these refugees will not leave until everyone is granted permanent protection, because it's been enough is enough. One of the chants that they have said is enough, that 14 years is enough. That this is their last action until everyone gets permanent protection. But it is actually, in my opinion as a citizen, this is what our government has done, is that they have pushed innocent individuals to the most extent forms of, having to sleep on the street, having to go through the cold, having to go through the heat just for their voices to be heard. This is what the so-called democratic Western country has done.
So there's been no response from the Australian government at all?
So Minister for Tony Burke, after Mano's death, had said that, he's, trying to figure out the process, as not everyone has the same, same case, same story. And I would like to say, well, it's been 14 years. There should have been a process thought about that. If you're going to state that the fast-track system is flawed, then make a system. We've got refugee advocates, we've got lawyers in the refugee work who are able to provide you with a proper system to ensure that everyone gets that pathway to permanent residency. And them stating that they follow laws, that they follow that is wrong, actually, Marisa, because Australia has signed the Geneva Conventions for Refugees. Australia is obligatory to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, that every individual has a right to refuge, and that actually every individual has a right to education. However, there are individuals I know in Sydney who have come up to me and asked me, you can go to uni, Ranuga, but I can't because of my visa status. Oh. How is that fair? That a 19-year-old who has graduated who wants to do psychology, or an 18-year-old who has graduated who wants to do construction, is met with the university saying, actually, no, sorry, because of your visa status, we cannot let you in. Or you have to pay the international student fees despite living half your life here.
Yeah, well, let's hope that things can change.
Mm.
I mean, but it's going to be very difficult because this country is built on theft of land and genocide and colonisation.
That's correct. And the refugee communities come from similar stories. You know, on behalf of the Tamil people, we have come from genocide. We know the pain of the First Nations people. We understand. We know the pain of the Palestinians. And for, the Australian government to continuously work alongside genocidal governments is atrocious. This is why the refugees are sent back to danger because, for instance, the Australian government has provided drones to Sri Lanka, has provided police training. This is the same government, the Sri Lankan government, that has worked with Israel. So,
indeed.
So we, the Elam Tamils, know that the Australian government is continuously working with genocidal states, and this is refugees are part of that system where they work with genocidal governments and they send back innocent individuals back to danger where they are killed or where they're constantly surveillance, where they're unable to live freely.
And, of course, we need to also send a message out that neo-Nazis are not welcome.
No, they are definitely not welcome. And it's revolting that they think that their view is what the Australian people want. That is absolutely disgusting. That the neo-Nazis have come to the encampment. And might as well say right now, Mano, on last Sunday, actually, he slept at the encampment Sunday and Monday, and he stayed awake, making sure that the neo-Nazis were not coming, because in Melbourne, the beds were being taken away while they were sleeping. Bed sheets were being stolen. So Mano stayed awake. So in our eyes, Mano was a true hero in making sure that no one was being hurt. But the neo-Nazis...
They've been coming at night?
So neo-Nazis, I'm not sure if it was the neo-Nazis who come at night, but in Melbourne they are facing a lot of harassment.
Yes, a lot of harassment.
So in the night they were getting harassed. A lot of people were coming to, mock them.
Yeah.
So while they were sleeping, Mano actually stayed awake and made sure that everything was okay.
Well, that's pretty amazing, and we need to remember that.
Yes, definitely. And a lot of... I actually was at the 24/7 action in Sydney when we got the news. And from chanting 10 minutes before getting the news, when we heard the news, everyone, Marisa, we didn't know how to take it. We were so upset.
Yeah.
And we held vigils nationally all over, and in Melbourne, Brisbane, Sydney and Adelaide. His photo is up with Sasihara, and also down on Thursday. We have their photos up, and we will continue remembering Mano and every single refugee who died under the harsh migration laws.
And that does need to be remembered, doesn't it?
Definitely, because this is the history of Australia, of the country that we're living in, that they have committed crimes against individuals who are innocent, who just wanted permanent protection to live peacefully, and they are messing with people's mental health, physical health. It is atrocious having to see 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds coming up to me. I'm only 22, coming up to me saying, we are living in the same country, but our lives are different.
I know. However, you've done a lot of really amazing work as well, and it's true. Your lives are different, but you've also done a lot of advocacy as well. It's approximately 4:54 and we're nearing the end of our show. In case listeners have just tuned in, you're listening to an interview with Ranuga, who is a young Tamil activist that started her activist journey at the age of 10. And in fact, you attended the 43rd session of human rights in the United Nations Geneva, didn't you?
Yes, I was on 2 indefinitely detained refugees at the time for 11 years.
I understand, Ranuga, it's really horrible, isn't it, that, you know, their lives are different and we have to continue the fight.
100%. We cannot stop, because all the refugees, this is the action that will be, you know, they're saying this is the last action, and this action we will not stop till everyone gets permanent protection over. No matter how long it takes, they will be doing this 24/7 action. And they feel 14 years is enough. Their life has been in limbo. It needs to stop.
Absolutely. Ranuga, thank you so much. Keep up the good work, and we'll be in touch again.
Thank you so much, Marisa.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.
What's taking place in Palestine is horrendous. The people of Gaza, who have survived ethnic cleansing, 3 wars and a 16-year siege, are now facing the biggest attacks ever mounted against them.
This will only stop if governments like ours demand that it stop. Here are some ways that you can keep yourself informed and involved.
Listen in to Palestine Remembered every Saturday morning at 9:30am or listen to the podcast.
Join the APAN mailing list at apan.org.au for updates, news about actions you can get involved in, and where you can donate to provide humanitarian assistance.
Listen to other news and current affairs programs on 3CR that also cover Palestine.
The oppression of the Palestinian people has been going on for 75 years. It has to stop. You can be part of making that happen by staying informed and active.
APAN is a proud supporter of 3CR.
And it's goodbye from Marisa, and thank you to all our guests for coming onto the show. Thank you to Megan, Jerry and Ranuga and Kieran. And stay tuned every Monday for the Doin Time show from 4 till 5. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. Bye.
You've been listening to a 3CR podcast. If you found it valuable, please consider donating or subscribing to support independent community radio. To find out more, go to 3cr.org.au.